Hello and welcome to the daily newspaper analysis. Today we shall be discussing the newspaper of the 30th of March. So coming to the first article, now this being a Friday, this is the customary yes, no, it's complicated article, and the topic for today is that should gambling be legalized? This topic in itself is a very important topic. The question can easily be replicated in the ethics paper, not only in the ethics paper, also in general studies paper 1 as a social issue this can be asked, in general studies paper 2 as a legal matter this can be asked. So this topic is immensely important and this is a full coverage of this topic. So that is going to be the importance. Now coming to the context is first and foremost the question itself, that should gambling be allowed? Now why is this question being raised in India? Now this question is something that is being raised because you should know that in the year 2016, for reforming the BCCI, a committee was what was formed. This committee was known as the Lodha Committee, and this committee, the Lodha Committee, had recommended that betting in cricket is something that should be legalized. Now this question then came to the Supreme Court, which was considering the recommendations of the Lodha Committee. So the Supreme Court then raised the issue, or it suggested that the Law Commission of India should look into this particular issue and give its recommendations to the Supreme Court. So it is now being expected that the recommendations of the Law Commission of India are soon going to be given to the Supreme Court. So this is the entire context because of which this question has arisen. Now coming to some background, in the background aspect, you should know the difference between gambling and betting. Now these words are usually used interchangeably, but there is some fine difference between both gambling as well as betting. Now gambling simply means a card game which has high stakes. So if it is a games involving cards, then that is going to be said as gambling. But betting is something that includes casino games, and it also includes betting on events, for example cricket matches or some other sport matches, or some television episodes is something that are often subject to betting. So that is the difference between gambling and betting. Now coming to the issues, the first set of argument is that yes, indeed gambling should be allowed within India. Now the first issue here is that gambling is a part of the Indian society. Now the editorial here is discussing that in the Indian society, gambling is something that is very traditional. People bet on animal fights on the streets. It is as common as that. And also playing cards is something, betting on playing cards and also betting on sports, especially cricket, is something that is very common. So if it is so deeply entrenched in the Indian society, then it cannot be ignored, and as a result of which it rather be regulated and legalized. So that is the first argument. The second argument is with regards to the societal attitude. Now what you need to understand here is that in the past, the societal attitude towards gambling was a negative one. But this has now changed to a positive attitude where gambling is considered as a part of tourism and recreation. For example, the Las Vegas in US is one of the biggest tourist destinations, and the prime attraction over there are the casinos of Las Vegas. Gambling is something that is now being explored as a source of getting more and more tourists. So in that context, what is important is that with societal attitudes changing, the laws should also keep pace and laws should also change, and as a result of which now gambling should be allowed. So that is something that has been analyzed. Another thing which has been argued here is with regards to the archaic law. Now first and foremost, you need to know that gambling is a state subject. Now that is the first important aspect, and all the states in India have their laws on gambling which are largely based on the archaic law, or which is known as the Public Gambling Act of 1867. This is something that is important. It is the Public Gambling Act. This was an act in the colonial government, and what is ironical is that in UK itself, gambling is now legal and it is well regulated. So if UK has made this change, why should India stick to the colonial era and not reform its laws? So that is one major question which has been asked. Another thing which is important is the underground nature of gambling. Now it is not that gambling does not exist. Even if it is illegal at present, it is a well-known reality that gambling does exist. The only difference is that at present it exists in an underground form. What happens is that a large amount of revenue which is being generated from gambling is now going into nefarious activities like terror financing, and this is comprising of the black money generation. So what is being argued here is that if it is legalized and regulated, then this black money that is being generated in the gambling sector can be curbed, and this is something that can be brought in the mainstream. Another thing is that it can itself act as a source of revenue to the state exchequer, and this money can then be used for constructive social schemes also. Now, this idea of extracting money from gambling sector, or for that matter as tax revenue, and using that money for redistributing to the poor raises the question of means and end. Even if the ends are going to be noble, indeed, if the money is given to the exchequer, then that money can be used constructively by the government. So the ends are noble. But the means of getting that money is something that cannot be justified at present, because there are a lot of ethical concerns which surround this issue of gambling. So that is one important analysis here. Another thing is that the author here is arguing that if gambling and betting is something that is legalized, then it is going to result in a large amount of employment opportunities. For example, in US, more than 2.5 lakh people are employed in the gambling sector, and also in UK, more than 1 lakh people are employed here. So for a country like India, where the youth is at present, a large sector of the youth in India are unemployed, in that context, indeed, this can be a source of generating employment. So that is one important analysis. Another thing is that some moral concerns is what has been highlighted. Now, it cannot be denied, as I have mentioned before also, that it cannot be denied that gambling has some moral concerns. It has some ethical issues which are associated. It is often considered morally incorrect. It is often feared that gambling results in a form of addiction. Also, it can result in loss of livelihoods to a number of people. It can cause bankruptcy to people, and it could go to the extreme form where people are compelled to commit suicide also. So in all of this backdrop, with all of these moral concerns, questions are definitely going to be raised as to whether the government should legalize gambling. But the author here is saying that already moral concerns are something that are already existing in the society, because gambling is something that is not at present prohibited. It is taking place, rather it is taking place in an unregulated manner, which brings us to the next point, which is that the government should ensure regulation rather than completely banning gambling. Regulation will ensure some protection of the vulnerable people. It will also help create more awareness in the people. It will protect the minors or the habitual gamblers. So these are some regulations which the government can ensure. It can also make some safeguards that people can gamble based upon their financial capability only. So in that context, the government will be more equipped to curb these moral concerns rather than completely banning gambling. So that is what has been analyzed in the yes aspect of gambling. Now coming to the second argument, which is that no, gambling should not be legalized. The first argument here is with regards to the ground reality. Now author here is discussing that if the government is failing to control gambling, then that is no justification for legalizing gambling. For example, the government is at present not able to curb drunk driving also. So this does not mean that the government should now justify itself and say that drunk driving is something that can be legalized, and the government should then impose a large amount of fines on drunk driving to increase the funds with the state exchequer. So this policy, the means here is going to be absolutely wrong. So that is the first argument which has been given. Another thing is that this can have a moral corruption of sports, and that is one major issue which has been raised. If betting is something that is going to be legalized, especially in sports like cricket, then it is going to be feared that it can impact sportsmanship and it can challenge the integrity of sports person. So that is one threat which is there in allowing or legalizing betting. So that is something that has been analyzed. Another thing is specifically to India. The Indian case is something that is different from countries like US and UK. In India, there are a large number of people who are poor. And now these poor people are getting an access to smartphones. And the issue is that despite the fact that their literacy, their digital literacy is something weak, despite that they are now getting an internet connectivity, and this is something that is going to make the Indian population much more vulnerable to falling prey to the menace of gambling and betting. So that is one issue which is specific to India. Another thing which you need to know is that India has a demographic boom right now. It has a demographic dividend. A large sector of our population is the young, and this young population is even more vulnerable to fall prey to gambling because they want better opportunities and easier opportunities, and the young population can get tempted to try their luck. So that is one scenario which is specific to India, because of which India should not follow the global examples of US and UK. So that is one analysis. Another thing is the issue of black money. Now, it is no secret that gambling is a source of black money, but this does not mean that the government should legalize gambling. Rather, if gambling and black money is something that is continuing, then this is a failure of the state which needs to be curbed, rather than legalizing gambling and, for that matter, black money itself. So that is something that has been analyzed in the no aspect. Now, coming to the third set of arguments, which says that no concrete decision can be taken, and indeed this matter is a complicated one. So the first issue here is an example of Mahabharata, and this is going to be a very important example. We all know that in Mahabharata it was a gambling game which resulted in the final battle of Mahabharata, and since that time gambling is something that has been criticized and it has had a negative attitude. So that is something that has been analyzed here. Another thing is that gambling is often considered as a natural human tendency. Now, the editorial discusses that there is no justification for this, that it is natural or instinctive in human beings to follow or practice this game of gambling or betting. So that is one criticism which has been made. Another thing is the impact that gambling and betting has on women. Now, first and foremost, you need to know that it is often seen that women are not very keen on gambling, which clearly shows that this is not a natural human tendency. And even if the gambling is something that is legalized, then this is going to have a huge amount of impact on the women, because the family is robbed of its hard-earned money in gambling. That is the first issue. Also, there are several ethical and moral questions, because it results in moral and monetary bankruptcy. Now, this is a key word. The moral and monetary bankruptcy is one issue which is associated with gambling, and as a result of which it should not be legalized. Another thing is that there are a lot of legal difficulties which are associated with legalizing gambling. As I told you before also, that gambling is a state subject. So if gambling is something that has to be legalized and a law is what has to be made by the parliament, then first and foremost gambling will have to be an amendment is what is going to be important in the constitution, so that gambling is included in the concurrent list, and it is only after that it can be legalized. So this is the legal difficulty. Another major challenge which is associated with gambling is online gambling. Now, it is becoming very difficult for the government to curb this menace of online gambling. And also, if gambling is legalized, then it will become very difficult to regulate online gambling, because primarily the jurisdiction is something that is an issue in online gambling. The jurisdiction of the government is only limited to the country borders. But whenever the issues of online gambling, then internet has no borders, and the entire crime, or for that matter the entire issue, becomes an international one. So this is one major issue which gambling is at present facing. So that is something that is important. This topic, as I have mentioned, is one of the most important topics for UPSC. So that is the relevance. Now coming to the next article. Time to reach out across the border. Now the context here is with regards to the India-Pakistan diplomatic spat. We have discussed similar article in the past also. Now the background here is, first and foremost, you should know that why is this diplomatic spat taking place between India and Pakistan? Now, the first issue is that India was there was an under construction residential complex of Indian High Commission in Islamabad, and Indian High Commission in Islamabad had filed a complaint that there were disruption of utilities being caused to this construction. For example, the workers who were making this particular construction were taken away. So these were some issues which were raised by the Indian High Commission. Another issue is the issue of club membership. Now, what has happened is that Pakistan has denied Indian diplomats a membership of its club. Now, this is primarily because Pakistan has said that in India also the clubs are charging exorbitantly high fee from Pakistani diplomats, and as a result of which Pakistan is going to reciprocate similar behavior to Indian diplomats. So these are the two major issues which have arisen. Now the issue here is that these matters are not very huge, but the backdrop is such that these matters have been further spiraled, and as a result of which what has happened is a diplomatic spat. So that is the background. Now coming to the issues, the first issue is with regards to diplomatic courtesies. Now what has been analyzed here is that diplomatic courtesy represents the civility of the host state and its people. It shows the culture of a country. So if in India, or for that matter in Pakistan, there is an abortion of diplomatic courtesies, then it is showing the poor state of civility within these nations, and indeed this is something that is a bad precedence being set by both the countries. So that is the first analysis. The second issue is with regards to the backdrop. As I have mentioned before also, the backdrop of relation between India and Pakistan is something that is the worst at present. It is the lowest in the relationship between India and Pakistan. There are also rising ceasefire violations which are existing. Also, there is a political rhetoric which is continuously there, and also the general atmosphere between India and Pakistan is a tense one. So the backdrop of this particular diplomatic spat is somehow tense. So that is one analysis. Another thing which you should know is with regards to the Vienna Convention. Now, the Vienna Convention on diplomatic relation was something that came into being in the year 1961, and the Vienna Convention on the consular relation is something that came into existence in the year 1963. And both India and as well as Pakistan are signatories to the Vienna Convention. Now, if both these countries are signatory to the Vienna Convention, then it is extremely bad in taste that both these countries are not following the rules of Vienna Convention, and such kind of diplomatic issues are something that are rising. So that is one analysis which is important here. Another thing which has been analyzed is the issue of surveillance. Now, what is happening is that both the countries, the diplomats in both these countries are facing a lot of harassment because they are being subject to intense surveillance in both the countries. Now, also in the previous discussion where we had discussed this topic, we had discussed that how this ensures that the surveillance agencies get a large amount of power, which is unhealthy for a democracy. And at least in India, which is such a vibrant democracy, this is something that should not be allowed, and a code of conduct should be set up for the surveillance authorities so that the privacy of diplomats is something that is respected. So that is something that has been analyzed. Another issue is with regards to dealing with the spies which are caught in each other in both India and Pakistan. Now, this is one important issue. What happens is that first and foremost, India as well as Pakistan do not accept that they are sending spies to each other. Now, this is something that the editorial says is a blatant hypocrisy by both the countries, because it is a known fact that both India as well as Pakistan are sending spies into each other's country. So what is important is that whenever a spy is caught, then in that case the spy should not be somehow discarded by the country, and rather a humane treatment of the spies is something that should be done. So this is something that is important here both for India as well as Pakistan, and that is an important analysis. Another thing that is important here is the communication between India and Pakistan. Now, not only the relations are at the lowest, the communication between the countries is also at its lowest in over a decade. For example, recently the Director General of Military Operation talks is something that was cancelled. At present, only the secret talks are what are taking place between the national security advisors, but nothing much is coming out of these talks also. So indeed, communication is something that needs to be restored, and diplomatic channels are the source of communication. If diplomatic channels are also going to be severed, then in that case that it is going to be fine, it is going to be the final death knell for the relationship between India and Pakistan. So that is something that has been analyzed. Another thing which is important here is that indeed Pakistan is wanting to reset ties with India, and this is something that India should welcome. But India is stressing that India's genuine concerns are something that should be addressed by Pakistan. For example, the convicts of the parliament attack in India, or for that matter the Mumbai terror attacks, India wants that the guilty should be brought to the book, and these are some genuine concerns which India wants to get addressed. So that is what has been discussed in this particular editorial. India-Pakistan relation and their impacts on South Asia is somehow the most important topic in international relation for 2018 main. So that is going to be the relevance. Now coming to the next article, tackling prejudice. Now the context here is with regards to the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Bill 2016, which is yet to be passed in the Parliament. Now, some background in this respect is what is important. In the year 2014, the Supreme Court in a landmark judgment recognized transgenders as the third gender and safeguarded their rights under Article 21 of the Constitution. So this is somehow a very historic judgment, and it is in the aftermath of this judgment that this bill is what came up in the Parliament, and it is yet to be passed. So an analysis on the rights of the transgender and the present scenario is what has been made in this editorial, and that is important for us. Now coming to the issues. The first issue is the lack of behavioral change. Now what has been analyzed here is that in India, despite the fact that the Supreme Court has given this judgment or this law is something that is coming up, a behavioral change is what is not being seen. Also, what is required for true inculcation of transgenders within the mainstream of the country is that an enabling environment is what is provided. For example, an example is what has been given in this editorial of Manabi Bandhopadhyay. Now, Manabi Bandhopadhyay was the first ever transgender principal of a college. Now, what happened is that this person had filed for a resignation due to some mental pressures, and this was largely because he was not being accepted in the environment. So it was a clear reflection of a behavior which was against transgenders. So that is something that needs to be reformed here. So that is one analysis. Another thing here is that law in itself is only a first step, and it should not be considered as the culmination of this entire issue. Rather, it is only a first step. What is required is empowerment of the transgenders, creating more awareness for the transgenders. So that is something that has been analyzed here. Another thing which has been analyzed is with regards to the National Council for Transgender Persons. Now, this is a body which is envisaged under this particular law, and also after this body is going to be formed, it is being envisaged that transgenders will get a representation in the Rajya Sabha, which is a long pending demand of the transgenders. So that is something that has been analyzed here. Another thing which is very important is the need for integration of the transgenders in the workforce, which is a major challenge. This is something that is not happening at present. And what is happening because of this lack of integration of transgenders in the workforce is that they are resorting to the traditional practice of mangti. Even another issue which has been highlighted is that the transgenders are saying that they are earning much more in mangti rather than joining government services. So what is important here is that vocational training is something that should be given to the transgenders. More education is what should be given to the transgenders so that they can go into more remunerative jobs, and which can result in true empowerment of the transgender community. So that is what is important. This topic is very important for general studies paper 1, social issues aspect. So that is going to be the relevance. Now coming to the next article, Kim Jong in Beijing. Now the context here is that Kim Jong-un has made his first ever bilateral visit to any foreign country since his coming to power in the year 2011, and the country that he has chosen is China. So that is the context. Now coming to the issues. The first issue is with regards to denuclearization. Now in a historic statement, North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un has reiterated his commitment to denuclearization. This is something that is in the global interest, and this is one important commitment which has been made. Another issue which has been analyzed is with regards to some other important meets. Now this is not the first meet or the single meet by Kim Jong-un. He is expected to soon meet the South Korean leader and also soon to meet the USA President Trump. So these are some upcoming important meets of North Korea. So that is something that has been mentioned. Another thing is about China. Now this is an important analysis. First and foremost here, you need to understand that China has been continuously under pressure from the West to check the nuclear program of North Korea. Another thing is that it is also in the interest of China to have peace in its neighborhood. Denuclearization of the Korean peninsula is something that is also in the interest of China. Also, in the past, China has supported UN sanctions against North Korea. So that is one important development, that both China and North Korea had some harsh relationship because of China supporting the sanctions against North Korea, but they have buried the hashe and now they are again associating with each other. So that is something that is important. Another thing which is important is that China was somehow also wary that if North Korea is going to directly talk to US, in that case China was fearing that it is going to be bypassed if a deal is what is struck between North Korea, US and South Korea. So China wanted to be a party of this deal, and as a result of which this particular visit is a historic one. Another thing which has been asked here is about the revival of the six-party talks. Now we have discussed time and again, six-party talks comprises of North Korea, it comprises of South Korea, it comprises of US, it comprises of Japan, it comprises of Russia and China. So it is being said that this six-party talks is something that should be revived for ensuring complete denuclearization of North Korea. Another very important analysis here is the need for a robust multilateral invention. Not only is the six-party talks, but other countries should also be made to become participants in ensuring denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. This is primarily because even in the Iran deal, what we are seeing is that US has rejected this deal singularly, despite the fact that this was a deal which was signed by P5+1. So in that context, for sustainability of any deal with North Korea, what is important is that it should be a multilateral intervention rather than a deal being brokered between 2 or 3 countries, because that is what is going to ensure sustainability of that deal. So that is one important analysis here. North Korea is important for this year, so that is the relevance. Now based on today's discussion, please try and attempt these questions within a word limit of 150 words. And with this we finish today's discussion. I thank you all for watching and I hope to see you tomorrow.